All right. So, as Michael said, I'm Claire Hilikoski. I'm a writing instructor here at the Walden Writing Center, and today we're going to be discussing writing literature reviews in your graduate coursework. So, note that this will be a little bit different than if you are at the dissertation phase working on that big literature review. This is geared towards literature reviews in coursework before that phase. And while some of the advice might be helpful, it is a little bit of a different intended audience, just so you're aware. All right, so our learning objectives for today are to define literature reviews as a document or type of assignment, explain the purposes and benefits of literature reviews, name the steps for completing a literature review, and identify the content and organization of a literature review. And we'll have some interactive components as well to help you work through those and practice a little bit. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are working in APA 7 now as of May. So today's presentation will reflect APA 7, and we do have some resources here. If that is news to you or something you want to learn a little bit more about. All right, so what is a literature review? Literature review is sources and evidence plus synthesis, kind of bringing all those ideas together. So, a literature review is when you have all those great sources and pieces of evidence and you add synthesis, which don't worry, I will talk about in more depth, you get a literature review. There are multiple steps to a literature review and they can change a little bit, but here's a potential process for a literature review. In many cases, you'll be choosing a topic or your topic may be chosen for you depending on the assignment, but you'll have a topic in general and you'll need to do some research. And then you'll want to narrow your focus because your research is probably going to be really general on your topic. And doing that research can help you narrow your focus down to something more specific. And then once you narrow your focus a little bit, uh, let's say you were focusing on writing centers and you want to focus on just online writing centers, for example. So that's a little bit narrower. Then you can choose the sources that are relevant to that more narrow focus. You can connect to your thesis for your document or develop your thesis by using some of those sources. And then you'll synthesize the sources, which means putting them in conversation with each other, thinking about the bigger takeaways that the research has to say from multiple angles, and then connect back to your topic. So it's kind of a circle, and you might not do all of these steps every time, but in general, you're going to focus that topic, do some research, narrow it down, and pick those sources, then synthesize them with your thesis or main purpose of your document in mind. All right, so when we think about a literature review, you want to think about that global organization, so that kind of bigger picture of your paper. In this example, your thesis is that high school principals can effectively enact change in their schools by embracing educational leadership strategies. So that's nice and specific. So we're dealing with, right, we're going to talk about high school principals, we're going to talk about educational leadership strategies and what works and how that can create change. So now that I know that that's my topic, I would do a bunch of research on that topic about effective organizational leadership strategies, educational change, those types of things. And after researching, I might outline my paper to something like this. Section 1, traits for effective educational leadership. It has influence and the ability to achieve teacher buy-in, be able to clearly communicate, can create and implement a strategic plan. And each of these points is going to be supported by multiple sources, probably in the research that I found. And doing that research can help me create this outline in the first place because I might not know exactly what the change and educational strategies I'm talking about are here when I develop my thesis. But after I do that research, I'll have the support for these different points that the research has in common about effective educational leadership. And I may also find that the research talks about tools for effective educational leadership. So they talk about traits and tools kind of separately. And some of those might be the same source, and some of them might be different sources, but they're all going to work together to kind of build this larger idea and help me with the global organization of my document. All right, so here's what a paragraph might look like in a literature review about the topic we just discussed. And I will read it aloud here. You can see that I bolded the summaries of the research and then I've underlined the synthesis. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Successful educational leadership is often measured in the ability of a leader to influence the actions, beliefs, and motivations of his or her team. Gillingham et al. Identified leaders of successful school turnaround programs and, after surveying the staff, determined that the leaders were more likely to have influenced the staff's beliefs about student success than previous leaders. Additionally, the Educational Trust was able to determine influence as a key leadership behavior after distilling personality trait evaluations of school leaders who were able to avoid building closure. In a 2015 study, staff at one building labeled as at risk were able to reverse this label after new leadership. Smith postulated that it was the new leadership's influence over staff beliefs and motivations that led to the turnaround. These recent studies support the idea that the ability to hold influence over others is an important leadership trait. While the research does not seem to control much for other factors, this does still suggest that emotional intelligence may play a role larger than or equal to strategic planning. Whew. All right, that was a lot of words, but I'm hoping that you could kind of hear right in this bolded section, I'm summarizing the important findings relevant to my topic sentence and thesis. So I'm summarizing findings from different resources, and I could have potentially combined a sentence that the findings were very similar between sources as well. And then I'm synthesizing those sources, so I'm putting them in conversation. I'm saying all these studies support this idea. So that's me, that's my own analysis. But because I'm analyzing multiple sources at once for a takeaway, that is what makes it synthesis. So you've probably practiced analysis in some of your course papers already, which is great. It's where you put together those source ideas and make sense of them for the reader in the context of your thesis and argument. So in a literature review, it's kind of the same thing, except that you're putting together a lot more information from multiple sources. All right, so where do we see literature reviews? You'll see them in your final doctoral study, as I mentioned, so it's good practice to work on them in your coursework. You'll see them in a capstone or thesis, a major assessment, as part of a larger assignment, or sometimes as a standalone assignment. The purpose of a literature review is a visible, polished version of your research notes and thought process. So it helps you prepare for a larger research-based assignment. It provides context for the information you found that builds on your thesis or central argument, and it helps you develop research and critical thinking skills. So it's a really helpful assignment, and if you have one, and that's why you've come to this presentation and are thinking it sounds like a lot, it sounds like busy work maybe, it does really help build those research skills, that analysis and critical thinking and synthesis that you will use in lots of different coursework areas. All right. So a literature review will involve evidence from multiple sources, and usually your assignment will give you a clue of how many sources that might be. If it doesn't, you should ask your faculty to be sure. Synthesis and commentary on sources, comparing and contrasting, kind of building on what the central argument might be, talking about what they have, what ideas they build on and kind of how all those come together. And there may be other requirements in your assignment directions. So always defer to your assignment directions. Review the directions for the number of sources, the types of sources, scholarly sources usually will be the case, and length requirements. So be sure to double check those things. Also, if your assignment says that it's a literature review, but maybe it's just asking you to summarize the sources and not add the synthesis, that's fine too. But it's not the operating definition of a literature review in the larger field. So if it does seem like maybe the directions are a little bit different for your assignment, but they're using the term literature review, double check with your faculty for what they're looking for and always follow your directions. All right, here's an example of what a literature review assignment directions might look like. And you'll notice that I've italicized and made orange the kind of number and type of sources, and then bolded the actual directions for completing the assignment. That's a useful tool with any assignment that you might get to kind of pull out those important pieces so that you have everything that your faculty is expecting. So it might look something like this. In week 4, you continue to develop your final paper for the course. For this assignment, you will locate peer-reviewed journal articles which support your main argument. You'll continue to search the Walden Library databases for peer-reviewed articles that support your work, culminating in a literature review section to be added to your final paper. This section should be at least 2 pages in length. You'll select at least 5 recent, published in the past 5 to 10 years, peer-reviewed journal articles, and synthesize your sources to best highlight the supporting ideas in each that build toward your larger argument. So here you can see that this is part of a bigger assignment. And this is something I see a lot in the Writing Center. You might work kind of in pieces on an assignment for a major assessment or something like that, and do the literature review after you've kind of done the work for building your thesis and your central idea. So let's do a little practice. I'm going to just talk through this. But in a literature review, no longer than 2 pages, synthesize 3 to 5 recent articles on the topic of effective group counseling. Sources should reflect best practices, and the review should highlight the trends and gap that currently exist. So here we can see, right, this is a different type of literature review assignment where they're telling you really specifically what you should look up: effective group counseling, best practices, and a gap in the research. So those are specifics that we need to pull out. Also, that our page limit is 2 pages, and that we need to find 3 to 5 articles published in the last 5 years. So that's all really good information that can help us figure out how to approach this literature review. All right, so first you want to choose your topic or review your topic, as in the counseling example that I just mentioned. Review sources and potentially conduct additional research. So if you are reviewing resources and find that you're not really finding exactly what you wanted, or that maybe there's a slightly narrower focus, you'll want to research some more. Then read the sources you found. Take notes. We have a wonderful tool called the Literature Review Matrix that is a kind of note-taking tool to help you keep track of the points, conclusions, and ideas in various sources. And then you'll find those big ideas or themes. The matrix outline isn't, like, for example, it's just not how my brain takes notes. But either way, you're going to want to take notes and make note of the big ideas, themes, and conclusions in each source so that when you go to actually write your literature review, you'll know which sources to put together in conversation. So again, next, you're going to synthesize those sources, putting them in conversation, connect back to your thesis, and talk with others, write your different ideas, and think about what the overall takeaway or larger conclusions of the research you've been reading are. All right, so as I mentioned, with that topic of culture and counseling. So that was our assignment for this particular example. I might be reading these three different sources, and you can see how I've bolded and changed the color on the points that connect back to my central topic. So as I'm reading, I would be highlighting these, perhaps taking notes, pulling them into a Word document to review later. So Smith discussed the importance of keeping the group's needs in mind as part of the counseling process. Some groups will need help forming as patients overcome their own cultural issues in order to focus on counseling. So here we're dealing with cultural issues, whereas Shepard revealed that multiculturalism is the largest determinant of success. So cultural issues, here we're talking about multiculturalism and success. And then Ramirez and Skotsky talk about the background and demographics influenced the needs of counselors, but were overlooked in group settings. So here we talk a lot about group needs. We're talking about cultural issues, multiculturalism, background and demographics. So, right, they're not using the exact term culture, but background and demographics are components of one's culture. So, they might not use the exact terminology, right? Uh, but it's helpful to kind of pull those ideas together and put them in conversation. So, I would be thinking about what are the bigger points they're making here? Do they connect to kind of a central argument? Is there a takeaway from these three sources that they have in common? Or do I maybe need to do more reading and see what sources Smith cites because I'm most interested in their research? That type of thing. You're going to want to be a really, really active reader and take a lot of notes as you're working on a literature review.